So a little bit of background of Ian, about Ian. I know Ian has a background in lecturing, and I think I first came across him when I shared a stage at Sheffield, an event at Sheffield Hallam. Really knowledgeable about the world of FM. He was the first podcast that I was interviewed for, but more importantly, Ian's role now is the company he works has run something called 3 Edges, where they provide workplace research and insight and change expertise. And what's important today is we're going to hear some case study background. So thank you for joining us. Anyone else that's just joining, just to let you know, if you could remain muted and if you could ensure your video is off, that would be really helpful. Ian, over to you. That would be excellent if you could start, and we're looking forward to this session. Ian, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. Mark, just double check, has that slide moved on? And then I'll stop asking you questions.
Yeah, that slide moved on perfectly well, and you're nice and listenable.
Magic. All right, folks. Okay, good morning, everybody. Very much for the opportunity. It's an interesting one, is this. This is the first proper kind of like led webinar that I've done, I think, for pretty much all of the lockdown and all of the pandemic experience. I've contributed to stuff, but to actually be able to sort of center stage, if you like, and it's quite exciting because 3 Edges, we've kind of kept our powder dry because we've really focused on getting work done, basically, rather than getting in amongst the sort of discussion. And so what's quite nice is today to come back to that discussion and bring some of our work that we've been doing to share. So this is the way it's going to run. Like Mark said, I'm a sort of a lecturer. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. So I've got a nice little structure that's going to keep me straight and hopefully keep you straight as well. So tell you a little bit about 3 Edges. Going to share some lockdown reflections with you. It's taken a while to come to these, and they're not particularly profound and they're not particularly groundbreaking, but they're certainly useful for me to think about the contribution that we can make. If you could just pop your microphones on mute, please, that'd be grand, and then I'll not lose my train of thought so much. I'm then going to try and share with you a couple of case studies, one with Housing Co. I've anonymised the names here, but we're currently working with Housing Co. and Telco. Tell you all about what we're doing with those, and hopefully, not because I want to boast about what we're doing, because I want to share the way that we think and the work that we do with a view to it helping you and giving you some stuff to think about. That's going to lead to some sort of practical wisdom conclusions, which sounds very grand, but I like this notion of practical wisdom. It's an Aristotle thing. It's about kind of thinking in a practical but also kind of academic way at the same time and getting the best of both worlds, and then just leave you with a few resources to help before we get into the Q&A. So we've got a lot to do in the time, so I'm going to move quite quickly, but I'll try not to talk too fast because I do have a habit of doing that. So I'm, like Mark said, I'm a teacher essentially. I found my way into teaching through an accidental career in facilities management. I've been in and around the built environment and the workplace industry for about 20 years now. I've been in-house, I've been outsourced. I ended up doing a master's degree at Sheffield Hallam, which is where I kind of remembered that I was a teacher all along. And I've kind of been in academia and then beyond academia ever since. So my business partner, James Pinder, I think he might be listening on this call somewhere. He's a building surveyor by trade rather than a facilities manager, but he's essentially a professional researcher. And he's been in and around the built environment virtually for as long as me, but come at it from slightly different angles and different institutions to really kind of try and think about the decisions we make around workplace and how to do things better. So about 3 or 4 years ago, James and I decided to step away from our university careers and set up a consultancy. And that consultancy, 3 Edges, is really about workplace leadership. And what that's all about, really, it's in service of better workplace decision making. So, as Mark said, we do research and thought leadership. We also do learning and development, and we do consultancy. And that's the way we go about what we do. It's more powerful for organizations. So we do things like CPD, which I'm going to tell you a little bit at the end, continuous professional development courses through our workplace leadership program in partnership with IWFM. We have designed and we deliver an Ofqual accredited workplace diploma, which is really important in terms of professionalizing the industry. We've written a bunch of insight reports and guides and workplace articles in all sorts of different directions, but at the end I'm going to point you towards 5, which I think can be really useful for you. And it's a little bit historical now because we haven't done a new episode for a good while, unfortunately, but we do the Workplace Matters podcast, and there's a wealth of really interesting conversations on there, which they're trying to join the workplace dots. That's kind of what it's all about for us, so that we can all benefit better. So go looking for that Workplace Matters podcast if you're still having your lockdown strolls and rides and runs and whatever you're doing. Okay, so one thing that you need to know before we dive into the kind of the topic and the content of this is Workplace 3. Workplace, I don't know if you've heard this word before or not, but workplace is polysemic. And what that means is it's actually got different meanings. We, like many things in this world, we like to get obsessed with arguments about what something is and what something isn't. Well, actually, to different people, workplace means very different things. So for us, workplace is how people work, the tools they're using, and where they're working in service of business need. That allows us to sort of come at workplace essentially as management consultants with a specialization in physical space and the role that it plays in organizations, but we never lose sight of this interconnected nature of workplace. And it's really interesting because we know that other people think about workplace differently because of the products and the services that are out there in and around our industry. And that's not to say that they're wrong, but our philosophy is that workplace is a system, a socio-technical system, and you have to think about both sides of that system to do great workplace work. So we try and kind of get our arms around all the different elements of workplace and join those dots. And that's what, for us, great workplace consultancy is really about, which is going to be really useful for the case studies. So if you bear that all in mind, I'll keep sort of turning to it and talking, but when I say workplace, that's the stuff that I'm thinking about. Now, another thing, just to sort of get the measure of 3 edges quite quickly, the way we feel about consultancy is this, we love to work with organizations for just as long as they need us. And then it's time to move on. And probably if they still feel that they need us, but we know that they're capable because we've sort of created that educational legacy effect with them, then it's probably time for us to go and move on. So our attitude to consultancy is very flexible, very agile, very, we work with you on your specific problems, but we know when it's time to go because there's a bunch of great workplace work to be done and we don't have to overstay our welcome. It's not in anybody's great interest. So it's quite an interesting approach when you talk to people about that because they're a bit like, really? You want to undo yourself from work? Well, yeah, because there's great work to be done. Okay, so if that's 3 edges, let's just spend a little bit of time thinking about the lockdown. Now, as I said in the introduction, this isn't particularly profound or game-changing, the stuff I'm going to say here, because we're all in this together and we've all had these sorts of conversations. We've all watched a million webinars. We've all talked to our friends about this on Zoom over a beer. So, I'm not going to say anything which is going to make you go, wow, that's different to what I've heard. But it kind of shows you where my head is. And like I also said at the beginning, it took me a while to sort of come to terms with some of this stuff, thinking about that change curve from shock and denial and acceptance and all of those sorts of things that we might go through. The pandemic, COVID-19, the encroachment of lockdown upon our country was in the UK. That was a big deal. And it kind of had an effect on me, and I sort of had to go through that journey to come out the other side and go, so what does this all mean? So, it's this recognition for me that, this is highly unlikely. It doesn't matter how much we want it to be quick. It's highly unlikely to be quick. It's not going to be solved quickly, whether there's a vaccine or otherwise. And let's just remember that, irrespective of what it's like in one country, the pandemic is still escalating globally. Whilst it's escalating, we're getting lots of new information about it. Virtually, it feels like on a daily basis. But that information's incomplete and it's unfolding as we work. Medical advice has become politicized. There's just an inevitability to that with our world these days. And we need to bear that in mind. And similarly, professional advice from within the workplace industry and beyond is really unlikely to be neutral, which means a couple of things to us. As we deal with this, we have to embrace uncertainty. and the likelihood of change. We can't design fixed solutions at this point in time unless we're happy for them to be superseded and out of date, maybe overnight. We also need to think about how our own personal opinions and our biases affect our business responses. Bearing in mind this medical advice, bearing in mind the sort of political influence upon the organizational decisions we have to make, and bearing in mind all the people around us who are saying, we think you should do this and we think you should do that, and don't forget to think about that. We really need to think carefully about the decisions and their impact, because there are always unforeseen outcomes. However which we choose to act, the we choose to take for whatever reasons, there are always unforeseen outcomes, and we need to be open and ready for this. And there's a really interesting sort of reflexive question to ask here. How do you want to look back and feel, or even be remembered for, if that's the kind of person you are or the sort of thing that you stand for, about your response to lockdown, to the pandemic, for your organization, in terms of how we go about what we do? How do you want to look back and feel? And I think that actually sort of almost gives you a bit of a moral compass in terms of what is appropriate and isn't appropriate, and the things that we should be thinking about. So all of this for me sort of creates this notion of COVID-19, coronavirus, the pandemic, as it's an opportunity and it's a risk. And, great things could happen because of this. And it didn't feel right to say those at the beginning of lockdown. I sort of had a hunch that there might be some silver linings out of this from a workplace perspective. And, that's not to be disrespectful to all of the tragedy and the other significant ramifications of the pandemic. But from a workplace perspective, it felt that there was an opportunity or a risk. And it felt like they were both, but you sort of needed to unravel them and sort of work, how could we make this work for us, for our organizations? And the way I've come to think of it is this, and it takes us back to our chemistry lessons at school. Do you remember what a catalyst was? A catalyst, by its definition, is a substance that increases the rate of a chemical reaction without itself undergoing any permanent chemical change. Or it's a person or a thing that precipitates an event, something happening. So I want you to think about lockdown as a catalyst for workplace change. It is, it's been called, so I think I've got a title on the next slide which which brilliantly captures it, but it's almost a natural experiment, whether we wanted it, whether we designed it, whether we planned for it or otherwise. And it might be imperfect, but it's a natural experiment. And that thing about Confucius, his wisdom about show me, tell me, involve me. He was right, because we're all involved in this, and all of a sudden we can see new opportunities. And so I think what the pandemic, what lockdown is catalyzing, is a real readiness in being open to a shift in work and what workplace is like as a consequence. So, this is hat tip to Magenta here for this line: the greatest workplace experiment never designed. And when I mentioned Confucius, it's this phrase I'm thinking about: tell me and I'll forget, show me and I may remember, involve me and I'll understand. This is what I mean, because we've all been involved in a lockdown experience and trying to sort it out for ourselves, for our families, for our organizations. All of a sudden, we've had no choice but to see and feel and touch what this future of work might feel like. And all of a sudden, new opportunities are possible. So when I talk about embracing emergence and being flexible and being adaptable, there's a wonderful bit of theory that we can think about here. And it's from Henry Mintzberg and his colleagues in the 90s. And it's this notion of strategy as realized. You might intend to do something, but, when the world gets involved, that messy real world, and it blows us off course, and we have to certain things get shelved because they can't work anymore, and certain things emerge as opportunities. We can think of workplace strategy within a sort of COVID-19 world as realized strategy, as strategic emergence. And it's a model which you might find really, really useful to think to and reflect to when it comes to your own workplace thinking in your own organizations, because it really is ambiguous and complex and desperately challenging. And I'm not going to spend any time on this slide, because if you want, you can watch the video and press pause and have a think about these bullet points afterwards. But what I'm saying is, different facets of workplace from different places within and beyond organizations are all thinking about different things, and they're all fighting for attention, and they're all valuable and they're all valid. The challenge is bringing them all together, and that's why we view workplace we view workplace collectively in the round so that we can think like that. So lots of things to think about, which takes us to these case studies. And a quick time check, make sure I've got time to keep doing this. So case studies, just give you a bit of grounding because I'm going to talk about two. I'm going to talk about one probably for more time, and then I'm going to talk about the second one a little bit less. But they are both really sort of view them like this. The organisations have viewed this as a time-bound opportunity to unlock performance advantages, which maybe the two they've been struggling to access. Leanne, could you do me a favour? Could you just press mute, please, just so that we're not getting the shuffling in the background? Sorry, thank you. They're an opportunity to gather evidence, to explore and to learn. So think differently about their organisation, but do it in an evidence-based way. They're an opportunity to work together and share expertise. So engage people beyond the organisation who can potentially help, but also engage different functions within an organisation to make sure that we're thinking holistically as a workplace. They're an opportunity to really focus on the future of the work, not just this return to site challenge that we all face and we're all thinking about right now, because they might be two sides of the same coin, but they are different. And what it is a real opportunity to do is engage the wider workforce of both office and field-based staff. So both organisations, and I'm going to tell you about them in a moment, have office and field-based staff, which means very different work modalities and very different visions of what workplace is. So, workplace to one person might be a headquarters building that, takes a 2-hour commute each day. To another person, it might be a van which sits on the drive and goes out and visits different sites and then comes back to the drive again. Two very different notions of workplace that we need to be thinking about. So for both organisations, though, this is really actually an exercise in foregrounding cultural change. So just to also frame, these case studies are not purely about workspace. Workspace is to be discussed and is in play, but because we see workplace as more broad, it's not purely about physical space. It's not about direct cost reduction, and it's not about direct space savings. They might happen in time, but this isn't what this exercise is about. They're not knee-jerk responses. They are opportunistic responses to the situation that we're in. And they're also not about top-down directives. So we might commission a project and sponsor a project with an organisation, but actually these are about broader workforce engagement to really understand what's going on in terms of people's feelings and how they're functioning because of the pandemic. And also neither of these cases are London-centric, which is actually quite refreshing when you before the lockdown, when you spent half your life on a train to London to go and do London work. Actually, these two are from somewhere else in the country. So let's look at the first one. So this is Housing Co. Okay, so Housing Co, they engaged Three Edges before the pandemic. We were working with them last year. And so they're a social housing organisation. They've got a long-standing presence in the Midlands. And this slide just sets the scene for you a little bit. They've got some absolutely great people, both office and field-based. They're really proud of what they do. There's a great sense of purpose with Housing Co, and they've got a pride in their regional role and value. Now, also with Housing Co, there's a long heritage of regional mergers. So what you've actually got is you've got these great people, but you've also got these subcultures and these legacy effects. So different regions and different feelings about what the organisation is and how it should be in the future are sort of affected by its past and its history. Now, part of this involved a recent rebrand last year to really promote the purpose of the organisation and to start really driving that cultural unity that the organisation needs. Excuse me, but and what that rebrand was part of was a major transformation agenda. So there's been an awful lot of work during 2019 on business performance and cultural change, and activities like exploring lean and more agile methodologies. I don't mean agile in terms of space necessarily. I mean agile in terms of project management and business methodologies. And so, I think it would be safe to say that for Housing Co, 2019 was incredibly challenging. There was an awful lot of drive for change, an awful lot of kind of pressure for change. And coupled with that, 2 strategic reviews from an organisation development perspective and from an ICT and IT perspective, to really think about the future of the organisation. And this is essentially where 3 Edges stepped into the fold. Our commission was to come up with a workplace strategy which recognised all of this and embraced it. So we're talking about workspaces, we're talking about locations, we're talking about working practices. And in terms of our engagement, our original relationship was through the head of FM, somebody that I've known for a good few years, but the interest and the ultimate sponsorship was involved with both the director of people and also the chief financial officer. And I want you to think about that in terms of, if we're trying to give workplace gravitas, and if we're trying to join up conversations in organisations, think about that sort of chain of command and think about the people interested in sponsoring this project, because it's beyond facilities management, it's beyond space. If we're talking about cultural change, it's actually in a people direction. So you can see the seeds of this in Housing Co, which is absolutely fantastic. So the original brief back in autumn 2019 was to develop this workplace strategy. And I'm just going to pull out a few key things from this slide so that we can move quickly. It was about thinking about working practices because they link to business performance. It was about space requirements and, inside and the portfolio of locations around the Midlands area. It was about the associated technology. And there were a few buzzwords bouncing around at the beginning. We need to be thinking about agile working and we need to think about what impact that has, on other things like travel, flexi time and home working, condensed hours. But I haven't put agile working in bold because it wasn't a fait accompli, and kind of leads to the next sort of thought, which is so often we get the cart before the horse when we're thinking about workspace change. We don't think in a joined up workplace way, and we don't think about what this is in service of. So just drawing on something that James wrote at Loughborough University with some of his colleagues about 10 years ago now, even a little bit more, I think, the order to think things about, and what we've been encouraging Housing Co to do all the way through, is think about your strategic objectives, think about your working practices, and then think about your workspace and technology. That's the order to really make sense of this and really power up the workplace change that you might be seeking to achieve. And if you think about it, workplace is kind of boxes 2 and 3 in service of business performance, which is box 1. So it's our model brought to life as a bit of a flow. So we essentially designed an intervention which is in 3 simple steps. I say simple, sounds simple: discover, design and deliver. And we did a bunch of activities to really start to grips with what was going on in Housing Co and what the workplace opportunity was accordingly. And we can sort of bring in a bit of a time to this because we were busy working on this discovery before Christmas, design over late December, very early January, with a view to cracking on with delivery this year. And as we know, things kind of slightly got derailed this year, but that was the sort of timeline we were working to, and we were discovering some really interesting things. Whenever you talk to anybody in the business about their culture, and if you used images to help them kind of talk about what that was, you can put words to this going around in circles: traffic jams, territorialism, hand holding, departments fencing, fighting with each other, permanently firefighting to try and sort out problems, very, very competitive within the organization, not having enough time, all sorts of really interesting, lots of people put different words to this, but that's the kind of message. But what was really interesting is when you talked about what the future of Housing Co was, there was a real appetite for the organisation to be something different. Even the colours of these images kind of convey that to me. People talked about teamwork, they talked about celebration, they talked about working together in synchronicity, they talked about being ahead of the game, they talked about having strategic foresight to be able to really make sharp decisions, and they talked about fun and risk-taking and enjoyment. And that's a very different organisation to the last slide, but what it showed to us is people get that this thing can be different and they want it to be different, and that's something that you can harness from a workplace perspective and something that you can build on. Another thing that came up during the sort of the consultation, the discovery phase of our work was whenever we talked about these 2 very different ways to make organisational decisions and actually to lead organisational change, very simple model about, you can decide, announce and defend. And if you do that, then certain things typically happen, which is when you announce your change, because a small group of either senior leaders or experts have got their heads together in a quiet room away from the rest of the business and decided what to do. When you make that announcement, then there's a lot of people with a lot of questions, and you spend an awful lot of time defending, and quite often what you were trying to achieve gets derailed. Whereas if you put the energy up front into engaging, deliberating and deciding, all of a sudden different things can happen. And actually of work part of the change, which it rightly should be, because at the end of the day, change is what it's all about. So when we started talking about these two ideas, what was really interesting is senior leaders in the organization started to almost reflect and go, we used to be all about engagement and deliberation, and we've turned into a dad organization recently. And what we need to do is use this project to bring this ed approach, this engage, deliberate and decide, back to life. And the reason I've put a Gensler screenshot there, it's a really interesting piece of research, is this, and it might be one that you want to go and have a look at later. This study between Helen Hamlin and Gensler really sought to look at the value of engagement in workplace design. And when we say the value of engagement, they looked at it from a well-being perspective. What effect does it have upon the people involved and the people who are working with the people involved? And there's some really powerful insights that are worth having a read of. So we've got a great passion and belief at Three Edges for an ed approach to things when we can. So it was incredibly heartwarming that Housing Co recognised that there was value to be had here. So around about Christmas, we started to put our strategy together. Around about Christmas, we started to make our recommendations. We're essentially building them around this kind of model. We need a steerco to oversee workplace, both for the strategic delivery of some certain projects that we need to do, so that we can improve our spaces and our locations so that we're fit for the future. But actually it needs to join up, act as a super connector for workplace within Housing Co as an organisation. And it needs to keep doing that. It's got communication remits, both to the senior leadership team and also to wider business. And it's grounded by some guiding principles. And those guiding principles are about engagement and emergence, and about all sorts of really interesting things which we worked out bespoke to our organisation would power up their performance, their workplace performance for the future. And so just as we're about to present this, just as we're about to come back to the table and say, okay, let's get cracking into the delivery phase, we've designed, it's time to deliver, then the UK went into lockdown. And I remember the calls really well. I remember almost feeling like I'd been put on ice, and it was exactly for the right reasons. You know, the senior leadership team, they need to really focus on business critical now. And this is just one project too many. They won't even be able to think about workplace because we've got too much to sort out. So that's absolutely fine. And so we focused on our other core business in different respects from a Three Edges perspective. But what was really heartwarming was a few weeks later, we started to have some early conversations about, well, actually, maybe it's time. And what was going on was some self-discoveries from Housing Co. They'd sort of recognised that they just proved something to themselves that they didn't believe was possible. They could work in a completely distributed way, like many organisations had discovered. They recognised this opportunity to actually come to site, return to site in a different mode, maybe having supercharged cultural change. And they had this real notion of stretch. You know, what can we do that's really radical here? How can we stretch this in a way that allows us to transform our workplaces more than we'd ever imagined? And so some sort of reflective questions there. You know, how can we be more progressive in terms of our distributed working? How can we reimagine our buildings and our estate to complement this? How can we couple this with safe systems of work and return to site? And what do our people need? But what was really interesting is they didn't, when we came back to the table, they'd done a cracking job of business critical, and actually they'd done a cracking job of looking after their people, but they didn't know that officially and they couldn't prove it. And they'd also taken on about 100 new staff during lockdown, and they needed to understand what that meant in terms of that staff experience. So this is where we got back involved, and actually this is where our ed-based consultancy at a distance took off. And it gets really interesting when you have to work 100% virtually. You have to rethink ways to be able to do this when you would have normally gotten amongst it in the building and done it in the room. So we launched an impact and experience survey, which really, really interesting. I'm going to share some of those findings with you next. It got an absolutely huge engagement. more so than any other survey I think we've done. So it just showed how relevant workplace has become, how tangible to the workforce, that they're really keen to talk about them and to share the experiences. And what we also did was we did some remote team workshops, and these are ongoing, and we had to sort of, how do we use the tools available to us to actually be able to do design thinking virtually so that we can really explore different things. So let me share some headlines with you. I'm not going to show too much data. I know lots of people do like data and like to look at it, but you know, there's some other more powerful lessons in this than just looking at some of these statistics. But you know, look at the top 5 are the ones on the left hand side, and I've numbered them as well, so you can sort of join the dots. But you know, I've been able to work safely during lockdown. It's been easy to connect to the network. The company's provided me with the right level of support. My line manager provided me with the right level of support. My home internet connection has allowed me to work effectively. So you know, that work experience has been incredibly powerful. And look at the amount of green, look at the amount of positivity on this slide. But then thinking, you know, some other, you can start to see some little ripples. So number 6, I've preferred to keep my work and domestic life separate, compared to number 9, I've been able to keep my work and domestic life separate. So I might have wanted to do something, but I've struggled. For some people, I've been able to work comfortably. Most people, yes, but not so much. I've taken regular breaks. Most people, yes, but not so much. And I've had the right tools and equipment to work effectively. Well, that's the most negative of all. Still very, very positive, but the most negative. So there's a few little ripples there which we might start to want to know more about and start going, well, how can we get at them? Looking forwards, some incredibly powerful findings. And what I love is it makes it real for this organization. This isn't a sort of a media headline, or this isn't a generic data set from the industry. This is specific to an organization. This is theirs to think about and reflect upon. So, you know, my experience during lockdown has shown me we can work differently, overwhelmingly positive. I'd like to work more flexibly in the future. I'd like to have the option of working at home more often once lockdown's over. I don't think we'll need to go into the office as much in the future. I'm looking forward to working in the office again, not so much, and there might be a few things to unpick underneath that. I'd like to return to how I worked before lockdown. Well, you know, an overwhelming negativity to that, and it's negativity for the right reason, if you like, because it links through to people's desire for change. So you might be kind of going, well, all very interesting, but how do we get underneath that? Well, let's have a look at our last few stats, and then let's go a little bit deeper. So, you know, there's some really interesting things starting to bubble up. You know, 53% have got a dedicated work area, whether that's an office, whether that's a desk somewhere. 53% have got somewhere that they believe they can work effectively. 1 in 10 almost are moving about to work on different tasks. 8% of them are able to get outside, or have been getting outside where possible. So there's a lovely notion here of sort of activity-based home working and using different settings for different things, which might be something to build on from a workplace perspective. But less than 2 in 5 have got an adjustable chair. 44% using company laptops, 38% own laptops, 58% company phones, 32% own phones. So it's interesting here. There's something here about sitting comfortably and the tools for the job, which starts to explain some of the statistics which start to pop up. You know, and look at own use of printers and own use of scanners. So where we need to, there's something not necessarily quite right about the equipment that we've got. So we've got this overwhelming positivity balanced with specific issues. Now, this is where I get super excited, because surveys and statistics are all good and well, but what 3 Edges used lockdown for was as a catalyst to supercharge our own insight capabilities. And so we found, and we've been working with and sort of cultivating a relationship, a really, really smart, sharp, cool AI partner who, and their expertise is essentially natural language processing combined with a linguistics engine, which gives them something unique in the NLP field. And we've been working with them to work out how we can develop deeper workplace insights at scale. And essentially what they do is they do thematic and sentiment analysis. And what we do is we make that workplace related in terms of the insights. And what we believe passionately this does is it gives us a depth of understanding at speed and scale that's previously unattainable in workplace insights. This is the sort of stuff that you would have had to interview people to get at, but of course you can't do that with an entire workforce, and so you would have run a survey and you would have produced statistics. And so what we got from this one single survey is 1981 free text responses, and we deliberately went out to gather as much free text as possible because we want to test this tool. And what that amounts to is 65,000 words. Now, I'm not saying that because mine's bigger than yours. I'm saying that because this is the stuff that we typically in this industry shy away from because it's too hard to deal with. And all of a sudden, with a tool like this, we can actually really start mining that data at speed and at scale and getting richer insights from it. These are why insights in terms of what's going on rather than just reporting of what's going on. So, we can see how many people are talking positively, how many people are talking negatively from this tool. We can think, and then all the people in between. We can start, and the tool is doing this automatically. And this is before we've even started to specialize and train it. We can look at what's delighting people in terms of the themes, life balance, being able to keep in touch, saving money. We can look at what's going well, interaction with colleagues, interaction with line managers, how people feel about their mental health. And we can also look at what people don't like, what's going wrong, the challenges of working from a dining room table, the challenges of printing documents when you haven't got the right tools and things. So instantly we can start going deep in a way that we haven't been able to do possible at scale before, at speed. And, I've got 3 simple sentences here just to show how deep these insights can be. So just from the theme of manage my workplace, which the AI tool picked out as a particular theme which was being talked about, we've got notions of independence, self-reflection and adaptation on the part of the employee or different employees. We've got benefits to employees of time management and being able to avoid interruptions. We've got benefits, life benefits to employees of work-life balance and childcare. And we've also got employee voice bubbling to the top as almost a byproduct of this. So this is incredibly powerful stuff, which we get really excited about. And the other thing we've got really excited about is the ability to run these virtual discovery workshops. So team level engagement-based approach to really explore whether one size can fit all or not, and how would it work for these different teams and different departments, but doing it collaboratively and doing it online with the right tools and techniques. So this is workplace change in action. And even though James is based in Sheffield and I'm based in North Yorkshire, and this organisation is in the Midlands, we've been able to work essentially from our separate locations and do some really great consultancy. So the story so far is massive appetite for change, a desire to be different, and a desire for flexibility. And but on top of that, though, really diverse experiences, and not assuming, having the right evidence and the right understanding so that we're not assuming that one size fits all, recognizing that short-term workarounds don't necessarily equal long-term solutions. And, there might be a real risk here of erosion of goodwill when we start mining that thematic data. We've got looming ergonomic issues for pockets of the organization. And I think there's a wonderful opportunity here for workplace, which is to stretch beyond that sort of statutory DSE, health and safety, risk assessment, compliance-based home working model that we've been sort of trapped in for years. It links to having the right tools for the jobs and doing something far more proactively about it. So when we say tools for the jobs, if we think about workplace in the round and we're thinking about how people are working and the tools they're using and where they're working, we can think about systemic reinvestment rather than budgets in silos saying, I can't provide this or I can't provide that because it's not what we do. We can think differently about workplace. We can think differently about what is home working versus what is working from home, because normally there are sort of legal and policy implications to that, but we can understand that and we can use the lockdown to actually power that up for Housing Co. And we can also, through an engagement-based approach, really encourage business functions to own their own improvements and their futures. So it's really exciting, this case. That's the bigger one. I'm now just going to share much more quickly what we've been doing with Telco. So they're a UK-based telecom service network provider. They've had change during the lockdown. They've got a new CEO, they've got a new chief people officer. They've got, like I said, they've also got office and field-based staff. They are bright, really logical, really thoughtful people. The organisation has an incredibly supportive family field with a lot of long tenures, but maybe historically more management than leadership. And that's a hunch and that's something to be explored. But what we've got to do here is we've got to get under this and, lots of interesting things. What's interesting about this organisation is they had a really good handle on the lockdown experience. They knew through their communications channels early how people were feeling, that they did feel supported, and they've been able to sort of track that through the lockdown. They had managed to roll out Office 365 and MS Teams actually months before, which was a lifesaver for them. And they've also got a really strong employee forum and union culture. So this thing feels different to Housing Co. There might be similar issues to explore, but it feels very, very different. And so, our relationship is actually through the Chief People Officer for this organisation. It's another demonstration of how powerful workplace change can be when you're engaging the people, the senior leaders, thinking about people and culture of organisations rather than just space. So we've done some work in the EC3 area with this person in the past. We've implemented a change for an insurance organisation which became branded as Work Life Better, and which transformed their ability to be able to work in a more distributed and more trustful and responsible and flexible way. And so we come to the table with this sort of heritage, I guess, with the Chief People Officer, and get into this conversation about, well, wouldn't it be great if we could really develop something which powers up telco to work effectively, but embraces, the return to site stuff and the digital workplace stuff, but actually makes this a far more powerful change and sets telco up for the future. So, one way to think about this is, and it's lovely that it sort of embraces the way we think about workplace, the way telco are thinking about this is, the overarching idea is future of work. And it might become a brand in time, but right now it's the future of work. But what we also need to be thinking about is return to site and is digital workplace. And there are almost three sides of a cube, which all of those need to work together to be able to really power up telco for the future. So that's the context that we're thinking in. And I've only got, I think, maybe one or two more slides to show you here. And I'm talking like the crackers to try and bring it in on time, so I hope it's still okay. But I just think what's really interesting is just really stepping back and thinking about the return to site challenge, because I think it will be safe to say that certainly in the early days of lockdown, the focus, certainly from the workplace industry and the workspace industry, was all about managing facilities. It was all about supply. And I think when you turn and think about it from the organisational perspective, it's actually about enabling communities, and it's actually about understanding demand and managing expectations and managing behaviours. And it's quite a busy slide. I'm not going to talk about this one too much, but you might almost want to re-watch this and press pause and just reflect on your own approach to return to site, on your own approach to workplace, and go, where have we been thinking, and have we got, and have we missed anything whilst we've been focusing obsessively on the stuff that we, almost the technical stuff? Have we forgot the social? And that's something that we need to think about. So it's work in progress at telco. It's not as far down the line as Housing Co. Sorry, I've just seen my sister leave the meeting. I didn't even know she was in the meeting, so that's completely blown my head and put me off. But we do have a survey in progress, and early indications are an absolute groundswell of appetite for change, just like Housing Co. But organisational specific nuances to explore, and we really got to use the AI tool to get in amongst those employee demographics and learn about the working from home facilities and experiences. And the other thing we've got to do is really harness that. Do you remember I said they were quite employee forum and union based on the introduction slide? We've got to harness that because that's their culture, and that's how we drive these virtual workshops in a way which is contextually appropriate to telco and really explore these team-based experiences. Okay, so I've charged through those. I'm probably talking far too fast for a change. I'm sorry, but I really wanted to share as much with you as possible in the time I had, and to bring us round to some sort of concluding thoughts. Now, if you've seen Apollo 13, you might remember this scene. It's where they have to essentially solve the problem of carbon dioxide on a spaceship with incredibly limited resources to be able to bring the astronauts home alive. And this is a brilliant sort of metaphor, if you like, for what we've got to work with here, okay? We don't have infinite resources, and we don't have the benefits of hindsight because it's unfolding in the minute. We are learning and solving problems as we're going, but we are an astonishingly adaptable and creative species. This is what we do. This is what we're capable of. And so, this is actually, I think there's quite a positive lens on this. And if you talked to me earlier in the lockdown, maybe not so much, but this is where I feel we are, and this is where Three Edges feels, the capability is and the opportunity is. Take the lead, okay? If your workplace conversation isn't joined up, you need to do something about it, okay? Be proactive, okay? You've got to get past return to site thinking, and COVID secure is not the future of work. If it is, there's going to be some very dull and lifeless buildings. That's not what this is about, and we've got to think adaptively beyond it. So design your solutions adaptively and flexibly. There is so much more to come in this, and so we have to be ready for that. You need your own evidence base, and you need to work hard to understand it. Don't rely on assumptions based on media headlines and generic data sets. You need to understand your own situation. There are going to be specific issues, and you're going to need to find them. Beware of extreme perspectives. They're really, they're rarely diverse and inclusive, and you need to think for all of your workforce, and it always starts and ends with culture. So find a senior sponsor in your organization who understands this. Foreground people over your process. That effort is going to pay you back with interest. Don't convince yourself that new processes solve things, because they help, but they do not. Communication is absolutely key. This is all workplace change in action. Opportunities don't last forever, and you've got to remember the power of lockdown as a catalyst. And systems and structures and rules and traditions, they are really hard to change, but you've got to remember this. And I know this is a busy slide, but old habits die hard, okay? Catalysts might regenerate, okay? Pandemic isn't remote. COVID-19 isn't interested in us, okay? But this opportunity doesn't last forever, and it's ours to do something about it. Okay, few resources to help dead quick. Here are 3 things to watch. They're not ours, they're out there in the public domain. You should absolutely watch them. Dave Coplin from 2013, so relevant and yet almost a decade old, okay, 7 or 8 years old now. The Economist shows the ripple effect of COVID-19, not just on workplaces, but also on cities and businesses linked to knowledge work. The Wall Street Journal, this is an absolute cracker, just showing the different ways that people are thinking about reinventing and redesigning. And, I would encourage you to think about low cost, no cost. You don't have to, spend a huge amount of money to do this. You need to think very, very wisely. Okay, if you want some resources for free, then here are 5 at your fingertips. You can, if you log in, you don't have to join IWFM, but if you log in, you can download them. Or if you want to get in touch with us, hello@3edges.co.uk. This underpins all of our 3 Edges work, and it's available. They probably equal about a 40,000 word book by the time you've read all of those. So there's plenty to go at, plenty of things for you to have for free. And we also do CPD courses, and we do a workplace diploma, as I said. Now, I'm not going to go on about this slide. I'm just going to leave it there for you to have a little look at, because we don't have time, and I do want to get to some questions, and I've definitely overstayed my welcome on my talking. But if you want more information, get in touch with us. hello@3edges.co.uk. Get a bunch of courses and a qualification. Okay? Right, moving on.
Thank you very much, Ian. And just to let you know, what we'll do is we'll upload those documents in the follow-up email, and you can download them straight to the follow-up email. We'll upload Ian's talk to YouTube so that you can watch it again and take in some of the slides that he referred to. Just a few questions coming in, and one from a guy called Neil Usher. You dropped into your narrative, change is what it's all about. That's an incredibly important point that was rather buried. Is change what it's all about? And if so, how do you reconcile this with your model of the workplace?
Mr. Usher, what a cheeky question to slip in with a very limited time. So I'm going to do this dead quick. So you can think about change as a noun, a thing, a verb, an activity, or as the very thing that it is in itself, which is in flux, which is the way I know that you think about change, and it's the way that I think about change. So we can utilize workplace change to achieve broader organizational change, but that workplace change, it might be bound by a project to make it meaningful, to make it understandable, but that's the way it is. But fundamentally, it's about accepting. And, I know that phrases like VUCA sort of set Twitter on fire with people grumbling about them. But if this isn't a VUCA time and period, and if this doesn't really embody what VUCA means, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous, I don't know what does. And if we're not ready for change, then none of that works. Hope that's okay.
Thank you. And there was an observation that we've noticed it's very similar trend in government. And Christina maintained from the start of COVID that this is a catalyst for change. Interestingly, changing our senior colleagues' mindsets to the workplace. So a question from someone, Ian, please can you elaborate a little on working from home versus home working? Not too sure if you...
Okay, so what I was trying to capture very quickly in that one is, if contractually you are a home worker, then an organisation has certain legal requirements that it needs to fulfil on your behalf, because that's your place of work. If you're working from home, then normally, or what that sort of come to mean in our kind of workplace parlance, is that that's not your location of work officially on your contract. That's what you're doing for part of the time. Now, what's interesting is we've sort of suspended that for lockdown, and we've all gone and become home workers, or the ones privileged enough to be able to have that luxury, particularly if they've got a garden. So what's interesting with this is this sort of difference between what's legal and what's a sort of a benefit, if you like, and also sat between that there's custom and practice, and what can become custom and practice, and what needs to be thought about. So this is it's you need legal advice here, or you need good OD people that understand the difference. But I think there's a great opportunity to re-explore this conversation.
Thank you, Ian. A request, Ian, could you expand on your comment, the need to enable communities?
The need to enable communities. Okay, so there's an insight report. If you really want to go deep, go to IWFM and get our managing facilities or enabling communities insight report, and then you can learn tons more about this. But I passionately believe that it's become so obsessed with delivering services that it's forgotten what it was there for, which was enabling fantastic workplaces and enabling communities. If we're not there for the people and the organisations, then what are we there for? So for me, that's what enabling communities is all about.
Okay, how much has employee sentiment regarding sustained home working influenced the workplace strategy at an organisational level, in your experience?
Say that one again, please. I didn't catch that one.
From someone you know rather well. So how much has employee sentiment regarding sustained home working influenced the workplace strategy?
Right. Okay. So, well, yeah, interesting. I mean, this is still in process, right? But if you have got an overwhelming body of evidence where employees are saying, we want change, we've discovered that we can do this, it's better for us, and there hasn't been a dip in organisational performance, and hasn't been in either of the case studies that we've been working with, then yeah, it becomes, no organization, I mean, it is very, very sort of trite idea, but no organization is going to do something that's great for the people which is bad for the organization, or very few organizations are going to do that. Count them on one hand. But if you can hit that sweet spot of great for people and great for business performance, then you are really onto cumulative gains. That's for me what this is about, and I think that's what we're starting to see in the evidence in these two organisations. Is that okay, Mark?
Indeed, I need to unmute myself. Thank you to everyone that's putting comments in. It's always great to have a conversation along the way, and people have been very helpful in putting links in. Ian, I think we are almost at time, and I just wanted to say thank you very much for a great session. There will be a follow-up email to this, and we at Herman Miller love to get involved with events like this. And it's really exciting to get involved with someone who actually knows about research, because Herman Miller has a very strong research history. We have lots more events coming up. In fact, one tomorrow morning, which there is still time to sign up for, and I put the link in the chat box. We will include Ian's contact details in the follow-up email tomorrow as well. I appreciate everyone. Thank you for joining us. And Ian, thank you again for an excellent session. As ever, thank you very much. And you have to stay a little while to wave everyone. If you want to stop presenting now, it's custom now to give a little wave as people say goodbye to you. So it's the equivalent of shaking hands goodbye, I think, now. So if you could stop presenting, that would be great. Thank you.
See you later, folks. Thank you very much indeed.